let us know. Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another episode of Witches and Wine. This is the show where we talk about witchy stuff and we drink wine. Clink and drink. You can clink and drink us too. There you go. Awesome. Yes, fruity and earthy. He'll talk about this in a minute. I'm your hostess with the mostest, Lola Stardust. And we are so glad to be back. We took a hiatus. There was a lot of stuff going on the end of 2020. I had to take a break, but we are coming back full force and we are ready to go. So before we continue with this, I'm so excited about this guest.
Yeah, we have an awesome guest tonight for you folks.
Before we continue with this, I'm going to turn this over to my husband, my high priest, my partner in crime, Silent Stardust. Tell us about the wine.
I'd be more than happy to. Tonight, we are going to the Rhone Valley. We're drinking a nice Côte de Rhone. It's called La Celestiere 84. It is out of, like I said, the Rhone Valley. It's a Côte de Rhone, which is a classic combination of Grenache, Syrah. This one has a little Alicante Boucher. We've never had this grape on the show, so
Boucher.
That'll interest people. For anyone who is a Chateauneuf de Pape drinker, they'll recognize that grape.
Bless you.
Yes, excuse me. And it also has a little Cinsault and Carignan. Very much a fruit-forward wine, especially for a French wine. Big raspberry and boysenberry notes, but then it has a little bit of earthiness and that cellar dirt taste.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, it's got a little basement.
Basement.
Yeah, it's got a little basement on the finish, which is really surprising on such a fruit-forward wine.
Yes.
But, really nice choice for someone who wants to introduce themselves to French wine. Going to run you about $20 a bottle. So if you like fruit-forward stuff, this is definitely want to try lots and lots of berries, like I was saying.
Well, thank you, honey.
My pleasure.
Always doing such a good job with introducing the wines. All right, so I'd like to explain this guest how I came across him. You say hairdressers, right? You hear the word hairdresser and you hear, oh, no. Well, my hairdresser, who's amazing, and I've known her before she was even my hairdresser, she'd be doing my hair and she'd be talking about this friend of hers named Chris. And she's like, you've got to meet this guy. He's so interesting. He's a good friend of mine. Just, you need to meet him. And I'm like, okay, yeah. And everything was going on. And finally, I just decided, let's do it.
Yep.
Let's connect. So, and I want to make sure your last name, Chris Seti, is that correct?
Seti, yeah, that's it. Seti, yeah.
Chris Seti, welcome to the show. Can you tell us what you're drinking tonight?
I'm drinking whiskey.
Whiskey. Woo!
Yep.
On the show.
Yes.
So,
we love
salute.
Whiskey. Salute. All right, Chris, you're a local here in Spokane, right?
Yeah.
Is that
Yep.
correct?
I live in West Central in the hood.
Oh, you're from the hood, yo.
Yeah.
Felony Flats? Is that the...
That's right in the heart of it.
Yeah, there you go. That's what they still call it, Felony Flats. That's where all the good
We got
stuff
this amazing historical house for nothing, and
That's
it's changed
what-
a lot.
Yeah. Oh, the thing I love about Felony Flats is they have these hidden gems. And, just beautiful homes. So, not all hoodie people.
It's
but
housing.
Yeah.
So you can find some amazing things
yeah.
down there, but you just have an interesting element for neighbors.
If you've been
For a
here
never dull
forever,
moment.
we know it as Felony Flats, and it's a colorful community, and we love it.
We moved here 8 years ago, and it's night and day now. Like back then, it was definitely it was interesting. Now it's fine.
So, Chris, I'd like you to tell us, because we've got so many interesting little things we got to touch upon. So I'd like you to tell us a little bit about where you came from in your spiritual, religious background.
Okay.
And tell us a little bit about that.
And where you're at now.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I was born to a white middle class, civil servant family. They were evangelical Christians, but like the most vanilla version. Like my parents are not weirdos. They don't get out of control. Someone started speaking in tongues, they'd been fucking out the door so fast, man. Like, nope.
They're
So
on
we didn't.
drugs, Yeah.
Yeah, so I definitely grew up in the church, but it was more like the place where our friends were. It wasn't, we didn't pray. We didn't, we didn't read the Bible. We didn't do any of that crap at home or whatever.
It
So
was
it was pretty
social.
chill. Yeah.
Social. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, my wife, our parents met when we were infants at that church. And then we ended up getting married in that church, right when we turned 20, right after we turned 20.
Wow.
And we had a 2-year-old. My wife had a baby in high school, which not the best thing for a Christian teen to do. That's like the one thing that they can't really get over.
Exactly.
And so I didn't give a shit about any of that stuff. I was kind of like 1 foot out always anyway, kind of like, do we really believe this? Can we just go? I'd be cool if you just said like, let's stop going to church. I'd be fine.
Yeah.
But she had a lot of guilt and a lot of shame. And she processed that by proving to God that she was good enough. So our descent into religion was really driven by that.
Yeah.
I was always this guy kind of running this perimeter around her, putting stakes in the ground, kind of going like, we're not going past here, like then we're fucking weird,
Yeah.
But I'm willing to go with you. And so it was really cool because I taught her that she's okay the way she is and all this is unnecessary. And she taught me like, open your mind. Cause I'm kind of my moon's in Aquarius. We'll talk about this, but like I'm super skeptical, kind of approach things through that lens of like, I don't believe you. Now let's talk about it. And then, that's kind of my initial input, kind of like instinct.
Yes.
And so I kind of played that role. She played, oh man, we've been in some crazy situations because of her like a willingness to explore all this.
Yeah.
But we always worked with teenagers, with young people. It was something that we just always did. Now, by the time we were 28, we had 4 children, right? And one of them was 10. And so there was also like the added benefit of like free babysitting and all that shit like that. But also we were very young. Most people looked at us kind of like, is this legal? Because it was just a very, it was a kind of an interesting thing to have these like, we looked very young and we had these kids that didn't seem the right age. And so we kind of always were working with young people, just kind of like in that scene. There wasn't a lot of people our age that were in our situation. And so any friends we had that through our kids or something were like way older than us, right? And it was kind of our way we related and like connected to that part. We were still very young and like we weren't 40. We were like, 23, it was like a totally different thing. But we had kids in their class and we're like, doing projects with our kids side by side. And so we eventually that turned into, we ended up at this church where they didn't have anyone running. It was a very large church and they didn't have anyone running their youth ministry. And so we started doing that just kind of as volunteers. Mm-hmm. And I had a career in the tech industry. So I was a paramedic when I got married, and then I was in the Army for 4 years, and then I had a career in technology. And I was part of a startup in 2000, which was the shittiest time to do a startup. We didn't know that, but we were fucked. Yeah. So after like whittling down, we got down to the core of people and it dissolved, and so I found myself in the wind. And the pastor's like, hey dude, I think you're called or whatever, and like, do you want to come on staff? So 3 weeks later, I went from like making like 130 grand to 30 grand, and next thing you know, as a pastor, I to be honest, I had not actually read the whole Bible. Okay, I had not. I didn't know shit.
Most people haven't. Most Christians haven't.
It's a lot of pages.
It's a big book.
No, that would change. But when I entered, it was kind of this like, and my personality is kind of like, I'd like to be in over my head. I like that kind of challenge, especially around gathering information or like learning something new. And so I just dove in, right? And I was like, holy shit, hopefully they don't ask me to do anything too crazy, you know, like in this period of like, I don't know what I'm doing every day. I'm in my office just like I'm taking seminary classes online. I'm just obsessively reading the Bible. I'm reading all these other fucking shit, you know, I'm just doing all this stuff. And I got really good at it, like quickly. And, you know, my career involved a lot of, public speaking. I was kind of that role. It was very forward kind of role, like public relations. And I was an engineer, but kind of were begging for money. So I was the guy that was out kind of dancing, you know, like trying to get him to like throw money at us. And so I had that kind of like charming or whatever side to me. And so that put me immediately at, this was a weird scene. So the church at this point, there was probably, I don't know, 1,500 people. It's a fucking huge church, right? Yeah. And a mega church, right? Yeah. And they had like, I don't know, like a whole bunch of pastors, right? And so I come on board, but pretty soon all this shit starts happening. So like one guy, he pretty much hates people. I'm like, why the fuck is this guy even here? You know, like I don't understand this. So eventually he leaves. This other dude falls in love with a teenage girl and starts sending her messages. And trust me, I can tell you stories. I won't go into them, but so he's got to get fucking kicked out, right?
Yeah.
While it's being covered up, and I'm like, what the fuck is happening? Let's drag him in front of everyone and shame this guy, you know, like. But they're like, no, we gotta. And so, you know, like pretty soon it was just me and the senior pastor and this other dude, and the other dude was like, all I do is accounting. So it was really just me and this other dude, right? And he started the church. He was about 20 years older than me. I was 32 at this point. Okay. And then the whole time I'm thinking, as long as they don't ask me to teach adults, right, until I feel ready, I'm cool. Because teaching teenagers is fine. Yeah. You like throw shit at them. If you suck, they'd be like, that sucks, dude. And then we laugh about it. And then, you know, we go play dodgeball.
Yeah.
Adults will be like, that was great. And then they'll go and get coffee and be like, dude, that guy fucking, you know, they're just, adults are assholes, right? So like, I did not want that kind of like,
on your mistakes.
Yeah. It was a little scary. And this is like a church where we're having like 4 services on a weekend and there's 700 people in the audience. I mean, it's like, it's a crowd, right? And so this motherfucker comes in my office one day and says, I'm going to Africa next week. So like, you got to teach for the next, whatever, 3 weeks, whatever. And so I'm just panicking, like literally, you know, I don't know what I'm going to do. This is going to be terrible. And so I do it. And, you know, in the end, people start calling the church saying, hey, you should let Chris teach every Friday. Right. And so that immediately, like, I'm like 9 months in at this point, and I became like an opponent, like a threat to him immediately, right?
Yeah.
And I'm this idealistic, shiny, like, fuck, I don't want to take your church. Like, I just want to be here to help. Like, what do you want me to do? You know, and he's just like, oh, this guy's going to like try and whatever. And so things kind of continued on. I would say for about 4 years, 5 years, things were pretty good. Went through a period where I was like the golden child, like everyone loved me. That was pretty fun. And so, and also, I mean, it really was meaningful, apart from the religion and the belief and all the stories and shit. Yeah. You know, we were taking care of each other. I ran VBS with 1,000 little kids that are just like running around screaming. It was a fucking good time, right? I had summer camps where it was just the most amazing time.
You're not the Grinch. I mean, you realize that, you know, you're doing some good, and that's what it's supposed to be about. It's sacred service.
We'll get to the Grinch period, because that's kind of but like, so like the things were going pretty good, and then all this. So this is a large church, part of a very large like church network, and they have Bible colleges, like college level classes. And so all of a sudden they're going to start one on our campus, and they're like, hey, Chris, you got to teach these college courses. I'm like, dude, what? I fucking didn't know how to be a pastor. I became a pastor. Like, isn't that good enough? You know, it's like, I'm like, okay, so you have to teach now. So it was just me and the senior pastor that were going to teach all these classes. And he only wanted to teach Bible classes. And so that left me with all the like church history and like hermeneutics, which is like, how do you understand ancient writing within the culture and the context of their language and idioms and all this stuff. I'm like, I don't know shit about it. I don't know shit, literally nothing about any of this stuff. And I'm like, fuck. So they're like, okay. But it's like a year out. So I'm like, all right, fine. I'm smiling like, sure, whatever. I'm like, oh God, and so that started this period. Now, of course, they handed me a book saying, this is what we normally use. And I'm flipping through the books and the books all say, it turns out we're right and we're the good people and we didn't do anything wrong, and I'm just like, again, my soul is still very skeptical. Even while I'm doing this, I was never the guy that was really pushing very radical ideas or things. It was pretty much centered on like, what did Jesus say? Hey, let's be that, hey, it got to a point where, well, we'll get there. But like, so I start preparing for these classes, and this is like, and my brain is kind of this way where I can just absorb kind of information and like it moving parts and stuff. And so I'm trying to put this class together. And as I'm going through it, I'm like being challenged in very significant ways of like things that have been handed to me that said, hey, this is true. This is belief. This is what you believe if you're a Christian or whatever, or this kind of Christian or whatever the fuck. And so I'm coming home to my wife, who's like the radical Christian one, right? But we had also been through some bullshit with, we had our kids in Christian school. I was on the board, and that all was fucking crazy. And so we've been rubbed the wrong way enough where she's just kind of ready. And so I'm coming home saying, so like I'm learning this, and like, what is that? How do we fucking believe this if this is true? I mean, I tried to find out that this was a lie, and it's not. And so now we have to face this,
Yeah.
And so it began this process of me like studying for this class, coming home, spending out, putting all our goddamn kids to bed, and then spending hours talking to my wife about these things. And of course, we started very on the periphery, right? We started around shit we didn't care about, like creation versus evolution. Who gives a shit, right? I don't care. That's all in the past. We're living now. What's the end times gonna be like? I don't care. That's in the future. Like, let's focus on that. So like we started with relatively innocent stuff. We jettisoned hell, kind of early on, and that whole concept. And even heaven was being a little sketchy. And so we started, dealing with social issues like homosexuality and what do we do with all these things? We're going to our boys. We have 3 boys, and we're like, oh, one of them could be gay. What the fuck would that happen? And guess what? One of them is. He's 21. He came out 13.
How do you reconcile that if your faith doesn't allow you to? And that's a huge one, because I know for me, I was brought up in a Christian household, and I thought I was Christian, but my God accepted gays. My God accepted women being in charge.
Sure.
My goddess accepted it. I thought I was Christian, and everyone's like, that's not Christianity.
Well, that's the thing, right? It's like there is no such thing as Christianity, right? There's a wealth of Christianities, right? So there are plenty of churches where that vibe they're totally cool with,
Absolutely.
right? I was in the church that thought we were better than them because we were so hardcore the other way, right?
Yes.
Now, it wasn't like, it was...
It's ego. It's ego.
Oh, yeah.
It's a big part of religion.
Yeah. It was a very male, masculinity-driven kind of thing, right? Excuse me. But so I'm coming home, and we're dealing with all this stuff. And so we're radically changing. And I would say we're actually becoming better at ministering to these people. And so they'd come in and I would preach to them, and they'd all walk out kind of light and like fucking happy. And they're just like, but then he would preach and they'd all be kind of like, and so it became this tension that's happening. We began to feel this thing of like, oh shit, I don't know if this is, because we already knew that there's underlying tension, and we thought God's going to fix this, because we're just trying to do what's right. And the Bible says like, count it all joy if people, persecute you, or, so you're just like all thinking you're on the right track because shit's not going well. And so it kind of eventually dwindled to where we just couldn't exist anymore. My wife is too powerful for him, first of all. She always was. And so, I mean, I don't know how many times I got dragged in his office where he's like, you need to tell your wife to be quiet. I'm just like, oh, you fucking tell her, coward. Anyway, there's no goddamn way he was bringing her in there. You know, so like that there was all these issues to where it got to the point where we're like, shit, we're going to have to go. And so I start, and at this point we're still believers, but it's in the most like basic fundamental way. You know, people would come to me in church and say, what do you think about this whatever thing? And I'd be like, well, what does Jesus say about it, you know, in the Gospels or whatever? And they're like, well, he doesn't talk about it. I'm like, oh man. So then, like, I guess we don't know, and we just have to go on what he says in the Gospels. And he says shit like, we have no right to judge each other, and we should be compassionate to people, and we should give to those who are in need. So like, we should just do that.
Yeah.
And it was weird. So it was like this, we became real groovy, right? And so
Jesus is a hippie.
Totally. Oh, I mean, that's why the hippies flocked to him in the Jesus movement in the late 60s and early 70s, was because there was this relatability of like this barefoot dude just walking in and fucking doing shit that are blowing people's minds, you know, like that.
It's
that
the Jesus concept from Dogma.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. We were totally trying to strip ourselves from dogma and going, there is no such thing, you know, like we're not going to debate the shit because it's all man-made, whatever. And so anyway, it got to the point where we start looking at other churches potentially in other parts of the country. And in the end, our hearts just weren't in it. The idea of being around, because we knew if we went somewhere and started a church or took over a church, it would all devolve into the same thing, because people are people, and we kind of wanted to be away from people at that point.
Well, ego, ego gets involved, and there's a hierarchy, and there's this whole point of what is it? Do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Yeah. So you were normal people. Did they make you feel like you were not for questioning and for?
Well, everyone should have some skepticism. You shouldn't take anything on blind faith.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it was interesting. For the most part, so it wound up with basically me coming to him saying, hey, I'm looking elsewhere because I just don't think it's working. I've tried to come to you and mend things, prove to you that I'm not who you think I am, and it's not working. And he was like, oh, good. You know, he was super passive aggressive. This guy, he was super tough in the pulpit, but he was such he was such a wimp in real life. I could get anything I wanted out of him. Oh my God, I did the most insane things at summer camp, that just because we were bringing in millions of dollars. You have no idea, right? And so I'm like, we're spending this shit on something other than fucking sending your books across to Africa or some bullshit.
Yeah.
And so he kind of was that personality. And so when I finally came to him and said, I don't know if it's going to work with you and me, I've tried. And he's like, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea, right? So eventually and he said, let's just to the end of the year, and then, you know, we'll call it good. And this was like September. And like 2 days later, he calls me and he's like, you know what? If it was me, I wouldn't want to be here still if I knew I was going. And so why don't you just leave now? Right? So I just came home at noon, and Marty's like, what the fuck are you home for? I'm like, you just told me to get lost. He's like, oh, well. So... that started this whole fucking whatever.
Were you treated badly after that?
So this is the weird thing, is a lot of those people from that world, and this was September of 2009 that we left.
Yeah.
So it's been a bit. Those people still love us. We still get messages from kids in our youth group. They're in their 30s now, and they have kids, and it makes you feel super old. But they will tell us. They see our life. They understand that we're not down with the cause. Many of them are not either, because they went to college, and all of a sudden, oh, this whole horizon opened.
College does that.
That's why the church did Bible college, right? That's why we had Bible colleges, because like, don't go to that one because you'll. And so. But we get messages even from ones that are still in the thick of it, still at that church even, that say, hey, who I am is so fundamentally formed by you guys, because we were a very big part of their life. We were very engaged. We again, we had young kids that were in our youth group when we shouldn't have had kids in a youth group. We had driving kids when we were like, 32, and just kind of like, we were a really big part of their life. And so it was very rewarding and cool. But then what happens is I go back to the technology career. We need to bail because at first everyone's like, poof, gone. Like bail turned on us like that. Yeah. With only like maybe one or two exceptions. And they're still to this day fucking great. And we love them to death. They're still never left us. What's that?
A lot of the tech is a godless community.
Yeah.
And if you even mention the concept of deity or God, you're shunned because you're buying into the masses.
Well, if you go to tech too, you're a robot, so.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it wasn't them. It was the church people that were like, see ya. Yeah. They like cut all ties. And so luckily I still knew people in the technology kind of field. The startup company, the last little remnant had been bought by its bigger company. And so next thing I know, I'm like making 6 figures again. And we're like, we got to fucking get out of town because we're in Post Falls. And it's like, I go to the grocery store. I mean, there's 2,200 people at this church. Like, you see people. And so,
yeah.
But my folks live in Coeur d'Alene. Like they're getting older and I didn't want to move away from them. And, our kids were still in school at this point, at least, the very tail end. Like, well, we still had one in elementary school all the way through high school. And so we moved to Spokane. We moved downtown, actually, into a downtown apartment with our 2 youngest sons who are still living with us. And that's when it kind of all crashed. So then pretty much we stopped going to church. And I've continued to pull on these threads. Like, I continue to like chase down this stuff. I'm reading books. I got into this intense state where I'm like, oh, I feel like fucking something's up and that I feel like the end of this is going to be the oblivion for this faith in my life. It was a little frightening because, again, my wife was very much about it,
Well,
and I mean,
the problem with a lot of those type of monotheistic Abrahamic religions is you're not allowed to question. You need to just have this blind faith, which there's nothing wrong. Some people can do that. That is a beautiful thing. Blind faith is a beautiful thing. But there's a lot of us that are going, we have questions.
And you're not allowed to question some.
Yeah.
So you questioned it, and you weren't getting the answers that you thought made sense to your questions.
Yeah, totally, exactly. And if you listen to my podcast, it's like, I would say, if you do have blind faith, let's talk because something's up. That's dangerous. Also, blind faith has gotten a lot of people into a lot of trouble. We just saw it on last Wednesday, right? I mean, that's what blind faith fucking produces in the bad extreme. Yeah.
But some people need that. They need the boundaries and the box.
No, yeah, I get it.
But then there's those who they can't. They have to think outside of the box. So I think that there's a reason for both of it. Only because I know people who have blind faith, and they are some of the sweetest, most wonderful people, and it's hard for me sometimes to not, I hate to say it, but be intellectually judgmental on them. But at the same time, if that makes them feel good and they're comfortable with that, then ignorance is bliss.
Yeah, I do get that. I totally get that. I guess where my concern comes in is that blind faith is only as good as what they're putting their faith in. Absolutely. And so it all comes down to the leader that's calling on that faith.
Yes.
And so if it's this one that's like, we're all floating ethereal, whatever, and we just should love each other, great. I'm fucking whatever. Do it. Yeah. Most of those people, in my opinion, are grifters, and it tends to be more manipulative and like dangerous. I don't know, whatever.
But you've seen that side of it.
Totally. Totally. And I don't mean that if you have blind faith that you're bad. I'm just saying be careful what you're putting your faith in.
You've been in the, I guess you could say, the bullpen, or of where that's happening.
Yeah.
And so when you're in it and you're questioning it, and you know that you can, you're confident enough in yourself where you can get out of it, that is a gift, because a lot of people don't have that courage to do that.
Well, there's a separation between the con artist and the true believer. And you have to be able to identify which you're listening
to. You do.
Are you listening to the charlatans, or are you listening to someone who has been there, done that? So anyway, so you went away from the church, and
did.
Yeah, and then what happened after that?
And so they kind of liken like losing God or whatever to like losing a parent. You're a little bit like set adrift.
Yep.
And even though I was much less intense and less dogmatic and like as like spiritual, I guess, about it as my wife was, we both equally kind of found ourselves in this, like, we'd grown up with these kind of principles and this system as our guiding force, kind of like plugged into our brain. It was our inner voice. It was our snap judgments. It was all of that shit.
Yeah.
And so, things got real dark. And so probably for about 3 years, we just were all over the place.
And you
angry, sad,
And I don't want to interrupt, but
no, go ahead.
We have a certain amount of time, so
I'm
going to lead you here as the hostess. So you went searching. You went searching something that meant something to you. On this search, what did you do? What did you find? Where did you look and read about? And
what did you do?
Yeah.
So the first thing I did, because I was super pissed off, and like I was making a bunch of money, and I threw all that away to do this thing that now I'm like, I don't fucking even believe this. What did I do with my 30s?
Yeah.
And so the first thing I did is like, you know what? Fuck you, God. I'm ordering the Satanic Bible, $4.99 on Amazon. By the way, I got it in like one day. And I'm expecting I'm gonna open this box and like fucking brimstone's gonna come out, and this like book made out of human skin is gonna be, no, it's a shitty book that is printed on newsprint. You can read it in 25 minutes.
Yep.
And I found this to be such an extreme act of rebellion, because I'm still in this mindset of like, Satan or whatever. And so, but I'm reading through it and I'm like, oh, okay. Some of it is like social Darwinism garbage that I wasn't really interested in. But then some of it was like, oh, I feel this, I fucking really connected with it. And so that sent me on this whole like left-hand path journey, and I really got into like chaos magic and like, oh my God. And then I like joined this group, and that's like a left-hand path, like initiatory group. And I worked through these like orders, and it was really intense, and it was really fascinating and educational, because these are very smart people. These are people that they're not at all what anyone would think like Satanists or whatever are, right?
Well, was it a bunch of ceremonial magicians?
A lot of ceremonial.
They weren't, right? So it was a bunch of left-hand path. There were Satanists in there. There were Luciferian, or whatever they want to call them. So there were a different kind of blend of their witches were in there. But it was really intense, because it really took you through the history of Western esotericism. You had to write a lot of papers and do a lot of research outside of the material they gave you. And so it was just great. And I really dove in and stuff. And so I got super into that. Meanwhile, and then I got super into like evolutionary psychology and like personality systems, and like I was trying to figure myself out, because I'm like, how did I believe this? What made me believe this, when now I can sit here and say, man, what the fuck? What am I doing? What was I doing? And so I became obsessed with kind of figuring out my mind and other people's minds and shit. So, and my wife was going through hers were much more spiritual and out there and woo-woo. And so we're kind of sharing with each other and stuff. And eventually, so my daughter, who probably was at this point, I don't know, like 27 or something. So it was interesting. Me and my wife left the church, right? And we're like pastors. Our kids were raised literally in the church. They went to Christian school at our church. They were at church every fucking day. They all went through the youth, like it was a big part of their life. We came out and we're like, shit, what do we do with our kids? And so eventually we had to tell them, like, we're not Christians anymore. And they're all like, oh, finally, they're like, we haven't been for a while, but, and then our youngest one was like, I don't care. He's just like, it doesn't matter to me one way or the other. And so luckily we had kind of all come out together. And so my daughter started getting super into astrology and started bringing it up, and she started saying like, oh, Dad, that's because you're this or you're this isn't that. And I'm just like, oh, okay. What the fuck does that mean? Like, tell me why. Like, why? When you say that, why does that equals this? And my daughter is much more like feels herself through stuff. And she's Cancer rising. But she's like very a very emotional kind of way. If you like slap a big book on her desk, she's just like, oh, hell no, I'm not reading that, like kind of thing. Yeah. So when I'm asking her these questions and these kind of more detailed things, she's just like, oh, I don't know. And so I'm like, okay.
She's intuitive.
She totally is, right? Yeah. And so I'm like, this is a really cool way to connect with her. I don't know shit about this. I'm going to get into this, And so fully with the mindset of like, this is bullshit, but I'm like going to like look into this. And so I start reading books and I'm just like, well, first of all, I've already been going through all this personality stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I'm seeing all this stuff that's just like the same shit. I'm just like, oh, okay. So you guys just ripped off all this stuff. So I'm going to like figure out what's going on here. And so I got super into it, hooked. I was just fucking, I could not stop, like looking into it, pouring over my chart, doing other people's charts to kind of figure it out. And in the end, it's been a really cool thing because I've really found a significance to it. Like, not just, I don't believe, this is controversial in this world, but like, I don't believe in magic. I don't believe they're doing anything to us. I don't believe the different planets and influences are like controlling us. I do believe that for thousands of years, it seems we've been observing stuff happening here, trying to understand ourselves. Our subconscious, which is this mysterious thing, is happening, and we're taking information that our brain is processing, but we're still shoving in there. It's coming out, all this kind of magical stuff's happening, and we projected it onto the sky. And it's weird how, honestly, I was like, I'm going to whip this out. It's going to work for everyone. That's what I'd all heard, right? I'd heard all of that kind of shit. But it turns out, like, when you really look at it and when you really learn astrology and the language of it and don't let it bleed into where everything is everything, kind of stuff, I looked at the first two charts was me and my wife, and we're very different personalities. Our minds are different.
Yeah.
We're very different. And I'm looking at these charts and I'm like, oh, I cannot find myself in hers based on what I am interpreting this as. And I cannot find her in mine. And so this idea that everything works for everybody is kind of thrown out. I'm like, okay. And so then I spent the last, 11 years or so just, continually using it for like self-discovery. I love sitting down with people and going like, all right, everything everyone's told you, whatever, throw that out. Like all the judgments, all the fucking morality, all the stuff that you've been like layered on with. Let me show you how amazing you are in this. And what's cool about it is, you try and look at yourself, you're trying to pluck out this grain from the sea of shit that's happening. You're having emotions while you're trying to deal with how you're communicating, but that's affecting how that's, I feel like astrology allows you to compartmentalize those things. Like, how do I think and communicate? Well, there are certain things in astrology you look at for that. And I don't know, it's just been interesting to watch how positive it's been, even for myself, to like be more of myself than I was allowing myself to be. And there are parts of myself that I like when like, oh yeah, I am like that. And I don't know why I'm not comfortable with that. But maybe I should like look into why that is. I don't know. There's a lot of interesting.
Astrology also has been around for so long to the point that if you study any religion or whatnot, they don't realize that they're basing a lot of their beliefs on
It all is.
astrological influences.
Yes,
Well,
we just did a
Everything we
podcast.
do.
Yeah.
Well,
I just did a podcast episode on this. We did a series for Christmas. And the first episode was kind of called The Reason for the Season, where I show that this is all the winter solstice and the sun being reborn. And like all of these things are astrological allegories that have been laid down thousands and thousands of years ago that were just reskinning, imagining in cultures and contexts that change.
Yeah.
And then the second one, what I take Marnie through is showing that the foundations of this world and we built on, we didn't tear anything down. I mean, Greece and Rome, they're in our culture.
Oh, yeah.
Like completely intrinsically embedded in there. They were built on astrological thinking. They did everything according to this symbology, according to the meaning. The Bible, came together in Babylon in the 6th century. That's the system of astrology we use. Like they were surrounded by a world that saw everything through this astrological thinking. And so the Bible is completely an astrological allegory from beginning to end.
The Jesus fish was based on the Pisces astrological sign, but I'm sorry.
The oldest churches they've been able to excavate have mosaic tile floors with 2 fish swimming in opposite directions. Yes. So if you want to say like, well, the fish is because Peter was a fisherman or whatever the fuck you want to do. No, it was the age of Pisces is what they're talking about. It was not a,
Go ahead.
Anchors were big. I mean, there's all kinds of like Piscean kind of this symbology that they used. Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Since you brought it up, what is your podcast so people can understand where they can find this?
I've got it. Blasphemy.
Yeah, so our podcast is called Blasphemy, and so it started as a passion project because once I got on this tip of like, oh man, there's like something other than literal stuff going on here in all this stuff. I started chasing down all these cults, myths, beliefs, religions, you name it, right? Trying to seek out like, where did they start? Who first made this up? What happened to change it along the way to where it is now? And like, how did that affect the lives that we live and shit? And so, and so our friends would come over and so I'm a preacher, obviously. Like I was before I was a professional preacher. I just preached different stuff. And so our friends would get together and it would always end up with like me pacing, ranting about something, and them just eating popcorn and watching and like, and pretty soon they're like, you guys should like record this. You should like have a podcast. And so I'm like, okay. And so we started toying around with it. Kind of put some episodes out to a limited audience and people were really responding well to it. So we launched it just a few months ago. We're in the middle of the pandemic. We're like, what the fuck are we going to do? We're like locked down. My wife, she's a hairstylist also. And so her salon had closed at that point. And so we start recording these episodes. And what it is we look at human beliefs from not just religious beliefs or even spiritual beliefs, but like beliefs that we've held as humans and kind of examine like, who started it? Why did it start? And then how did it change? And so we've done episodes on the satanic panic around Dungeons and Dragons in the 1980s and 90s, right? And you through this is what really happened, and this was the layered on top, hysteria.
And where can we find these podcasts at?
What's that?
Where can we find these podcasts?
You can find us on Apple Podcasts. You can also find us at blasphemypodcast.com.
Okay.
But pretty much wherever you get your podcast, if you have an app, whatever, if you type in Blasphemy, you'll find it. It'll say Blasphemy with Chris and Marnie on the little picture. But yeah, check it out. We talk about stuff like the myth of the human alpha male, right? It's not all spiritual stuff. Some of it is like scientific beliefs that we've held and kind of the impact it had on our society as science goes, oh, no, we were wrong. Society continues along. What's the damage that's done from that? We look at those kinds of things.
And you're doing a workshop, aren't you? Your astrology workshop. And when are the dates of that?
So the first one is January 17th.
Okay.
And
That's
so
good.
it's an introduction to astrology.
Yeah.
So the course is designed to teach you and get you fluent in the language of astrology. But the first session is kind of laying that groundwork of like, okay, let's get a basic understanding of these. What does your chart look like? It's really confusing with all the symbols, but here's what these symbols are, and here's what these are, and just basic information so that then we can dive into each one of those components and kind of start building a picture of, if you know, this planet is in this sign and it has this aspect to this other planet in this sign, what does that mean? You know, that it can be a little bit confusing.
And that's hereticastrologer.com, correct?
Yeah, heretic astrologer, right.
Yeah, and I'm going to put those
tapping into that, you know, evil vibe.
Yeah, we'll post those. I have a question because I love astrology. I've been I've been studying astrology for quite a long time, and I love to talk to other astrologists. Can you tell? This is how I feel when you look at someone's birth chart. Don't you feel like you can tell everything about them, like things that they even may be questioning and going, why am I like this? It's almost psychological, right?
Yeah, no, I do. See, and what's that?
You're getting a blueprint.
A blueprint.
Yeah, it is. So okay, so when I say like I don't think anything's going on, maybe that's not true. I don't believe like Pluto is doing anything to us. It's not. We've sent fucking spacecraft out there. We've measured shit. It's not. Yeah. It has no magnetic. There's nothing energy that could be coming to. So, but and we know that the sun impacts. It is life, right? I mean, the energy of the sun is the only reason we're here. So it obviously affects us. We know the moon is impacting the earth, not just the tides. I mean, so many animals, reproductive and the migrational and all this stuff is tied to the cycles of the moon. So we understand that there are influences going on. Some we can feel and discern, maybe some that we cannot. And you know, the sun going through the zodiac throughout the year, and then the moon going through the zodiac every month, and then, you know, the zodiac spinning every day. Well, that creates a lot of variation and like possibilities within that. And so I totally leave room to like, maybe when the sun and moon are doing this shit, these planets are up there, and it's like correlations, right? It's like signposts that say, hey, this is going on, which is why we can kind of like determine, well, this mix of energy that the sun and moon is creating that's complex and, you know, unknowable probably in its entirety, these things are signaling that just simply because these are moving in such a regular way that, you know, it's kind of like a clock kind of thing where take a snapshot and these parts are over here. They're not doing anything, but they're showing you that this is happening from these things. I guess that's kind of my current theory. I don't know.
So I take it you're a Cancer because your shirt.
So my sun is in Cancer. So that's a common thing. Like a lot of people, they love to say we're all the full zodiac. So like all 12 signs, all 12 houses, all 10 planets. And you know, dials are turned. It's not like it's like, you know, like when you like see those like people producing songs and they have all those, you know, slider volume things. It's like that. Like everything comes together to make that song, but you can't have all of them turned up or all of them turned, you know, that there's this mix that makes that particular song. And so we have all of this energy happening. It's just, you know, certain areas of our life and things, you know, kind of characteristics and traits it's to me, like I think people come in with this very, very minimal, they've like read stuff online or they search stuff and they're like, well, I'm a Taurus or whatever. To be honest, like your sun sign, unless like your moon sign is in the same sign, or maybe it's in the first house and so your rising sign and sun sign are the same, people don't really see you as your sun sign. I mean, it is the personality, and personality we've kind of allowed to become this blanket term of like the full profile of us, but really technically personality is the way you see yourself. That's the sun. It's ego, right? It's like, that's why your ego is wounded, is because you're like, you just treated me in a way that I don't feel I'm worthy of, because I'm, or
our sun, is what we project, but it doesn't necessarily mean
what we feel,
who we really are. And that is
Right.
why it's important to understand your birth charts and also what's going on right now, because like for me, I'm a Capricorn.
Okay.
And I understand a lot of Capricorn traits, and I have those, but for the longest time before I got into birth charts and astrology, it didn't resonate with me. I was like, Capricorn, schmapricorn. Like, I'm so much more outgoing. I'm so much more,
Right.
And so once I started studying my birth chart, where my moon was, it's a blueprint. It's not, you are not just one thing. You are
Right.
many, many things.
it's
Right.
not schematic, but
Yeah.
it is.
It helps.
Well, and then those things are relating to each other, and so this thing
Yes.
might be a very powerful influence, but it comes in direct conflict with this other thing that, like your rising sign is super important, and a lot of people, think I'm this, and I'm like, I don't see it as that at all, but their mask they wear is different. Do you know what your moon is and your rising is?
Oh God, yeah. I'm so sun sign Capricorn. My moon is Pisces, and my rising is Leo.
Okay, so see, you have like the heart and soul of this mystic, whatever. But notice your Capricorn sun is right on display here because it's the sign of public image. It's the sign of like being out there. They don't do things at home by themselves in private.
No,
That's
no.
more Cancerian, which is the opposite sign of Capricorn.
Yes.
Capricorn is achievement, career, and it's not the cold, emotionless kind of thing that we see a lot. It's got a fish's tail, there's emotion, there's water there, right?
People
In fact,
forget
an
that.
ancient symbol of Capricorn is a mountain, right? Speaking of earthy stability, all that shit, and heights, right?
Yeah.
But with a lake on it, right? So
Yes.
even ancients were saying, hey, it's not emotionless sign. There's water.
Thank you for pointing that out, because a lot of people would be like, Capricorn, the goat, and I'm like, but look at that tail. Like
Yeah,
that is
yeah.
a huge part,
Yeah.
So, but we're coming up on our time because people have short attention span. But you're gonna be a guest again, and if you ever need guests for your podcast,
Awesome. Yeah, I would love that. And please ask me to be on again. This was super fun.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We could talk about this all night long.
Well, and we can maybe on a future episode we can get into what some of the other practices that you've gone down.
Yes, I'd like to hear about some of the more, because like I'm kind of similar to you. I did it a little bit younger. I don't know how old you are. Do you mind asking me?
I just turned 50 this last July 20th.
You're in I'll be 49 in 6 days.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say your birthday's got to be around here sometime.
Yeah,
my wife is Capricorn. She was just January 8th. Yep.
I'll be 49. And I forgot what I was talking about. What were we talking about?
We're talking about
too much wine. This is what happens on Witches and Wine.
Well, we're talking about how we need to reconnect with you in multiple manners,
Yes.
including in here.
Oh,
yes, absolutely. And yeah, have me back, because I'd love to take you on kind of some of the journeys that I went on. It was fascinating.
I had a very similar journeys, but in my teens and 20s.
Okay.
I was raised in a Christian family, and I would ask all these questions of my very Christian parents, and they finally said, go research it. Like, they couldn't give me the answer. We can't answer.
You're asking the weird questions that we don't know.
So I did the whole, rebellion, teenage thing, satanic path, and Luciferian, but then I went to Buddhism and Taoism, and I researched all these things, and I kept coming back to witchcraft and Wicca, and so we could have a whole talk on that. But
that sounds amazing. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, we'd have a great time, but our YouTube viewers, like I said, short attention span. We got
No, that's fine.
Oh,
It's really good.
Because it starts to drone and people start falling asleep, and that's not the intent.
So, but Chris, you're amazing. I would love, when the pandemic is over and the quarantine's over, I would love to just you and your wife and me and
just
my husband.
Have you guys come over?
Oh, absolutely, of course, we'd be so down with that. It'd be amazing.
Oh my God, we would have such a great time.
Yeah.
So, to our viewers, anyone who is interested in what we do as a coven or our show, if you have an idea for a guest, you can email us at
crossroadscoven@gmail.com.
What was that email address again?
That was crossroadscoven@gmail.com.
Thank you, everyone, so much. This has been, oh my God, amazing. We could go on and on and on.
Very cool conversation tonight.
Very
Thank you.
amazing guest.
I appreciate it.
Remember, everyone, always be kind to each other and always walk with the goddess. And until next time, blessed be.
And
clink and drink and have a great night. And now I need to find my pointer. And we're still filming. And